Thanks so much for having me today. I was completely overwhelmed by the response to this session in terms of the fact there have been, now 2 whole sessions plus it being streamed to Melbourne. It was not really kind of what I expected. But I think it's probably a reflection of where a lot of people are at with mobile technology. And I'd just like to ask with a quick poll, who here is actually currently using like an iPad or a tablet as it's part of their work? Yeah? Okay, who finds it quite usable, quite easy to use? Yeah? Who finds it really useful? Like who finds it that they're using it all the time and it does everything that they would expect it to do? Yeah. There's a great, I think, way of capturing whether or not technology is any good. And it's the idea of usability and usefulness. If something is really powerful, you're going to find that it's really easy to use to get it to do the things that you want. Just one more thing that I kind of like to make sure that everyone understands before I start is that I actually have zero IT experience whatsoever. So when I come and talk to you, none of what I have learned has been learned through any kind of formal IT training. It's purely been learnt on the job. And I think that that should be kind of comforting in a sense, because if I can learn it on the job, anyone can learn it on the job. Like there's no special skill that you need to do. There's no university course or anything like that. So everything we talk about today is something that's actually quite easy for you to learn and implement in the way that you work. I want to start with this, this image. And does anyone just hands up if you know what this picture is of? There's a couple of people. This is a computer called Watson. So it's actually playing a game show called Jeopardy. So Jeopardy is a US game show. And as you can see here, there is 2 human players in the middle. There's a computer. The 2 human players have never been defeated before by any human. And you can see the scores are not very even. This is not new. This is actually about 3 years old. And I think to put context around this, it's really important to kind of appreciate exactly what that computer is doing. So in this scenario, the host is actually reading out a question. The computer has to understand the words in that question and put those words into a sequence that actually has meaning. Anyone who's ever seen Jeopardy knows there's also a lot of wordplay that goes on within the game. Watson then kind of consults a database of information, and it works out what possible answers it has to that question. It then rates those answers based on the probability that they're going to be correct, and on the likelihood then that it has a very highly probable answer. It then buzzes in and makes a bet based on its response. And it does all that before the humans buzz in. That's measured in milliseconds. Now, since then, since 3 years ago, Watson has actually got some work out in the real world. One of the first jobs Watson got was actually working on Wall Street, reading the financial press. And when I say reading the financial press, it's like all the financial press, not just the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, but all the blogs, all the newspapers. And basically, it was mining that information for market sentiment around particular stocks. And based on the sentiment in those newspaper articles and in those blog posts, it was then making investments in the stock market, autonomous of humans. More recently and slightly more altruistically, Watson is also now helping doctors diagnose cancer. And it's the thing about, there was an article that came out about February this year that suggests that now that Watson is more accurate in diagnosing cancer than a human doctor is. And the reason being is that Watson can read every medical journal that has ever been written. It can read every research report, and it can put all that data and it will never forget it. I think they estimated in the first 3 months that Watson embarked on this project, it read more medical research and information than most doctors will cover in their 7 years of medical schooling. Does anyone look at that and kind of find that a little bit concerning? And I think there is a reason to be a little bit concerned, because I don't think many of us could compete with Watson when it comes to basically reading and assimilating massive amounts of data. But there's also some things that Watson's very bad at. Watson has a terrible bedside manner, for one thing. When you wheel him in next to the patient and get Watson to ask some questions, people don't necessarily respond very well. There's also some other things that computers are inherently bad at. Creative and strategic type of work. The ability to actually take that data and create meaning that's not actually already contained in it. And so what we actually have now is a world that we live in where technology is actually destroying jobs faster than it's creating them. yet at the same time, there's actually a global talent war for non-computable skills. So we've always had this situation where we believe that technology destroys jobs. There's also been an assumption that technology creates jobs. And then there's some work done by MIT in the US that now suggests, though, since about the mid-1990s, there's actually a decoupling of that, in the sense that now technology is actually destroying jobs faster. And that is a real risk in some ways for all of us. And not necessarily because our whole job is going to disappear, but parts of every person's job are going to be overtaken by technology. At the same time, there is this other core of what we do, these very human skills, the relational, the creative, and the strategic skills and tasks that we do every day, where technology is inherently bad at, but ultimately is the type of work we generally find more rewarding and also more valuable. And so we're kind of left with this dilemma where technology or digital technology can either build or destroy our value. If we continue to work in the way that we have always worked, the tasks that technology learns to do will decline in value over time. Because once a computer learns how to do that task, it can do it 1,000,000 times at almost zero cost. And a great example of this is expense reports. Has anyone who here has to do an expense report? Yeah? So has anyone heard of an app called Expensify? So Expensify allows you to basically take a photograph of a receipt. It will then send it to a computer that will strip out all the metadata from that. So it'll take the merchant name, the amount, the date. It will then format that into an expense report that looks just like your company's expense report. All you've got to do is go in and assign a code against it about what that expense was for. So suddenly you have this task, and I remember when I was working at Rio Tinto that you'd spend a half a day a month, kind of doing these expense reports. So maybe that used to be worth a few $100 to do this expense report, because everybody had to do it. Doesn't matter whether you're an executive or whether you were kind of lower down in the pecking order. But now, when Expensify does it, it does it for 20 cents a scan. So that whole expense report that used to be worth $300 is now worth about $20. If we continue to work and do those things ourselves, part of our value is being destroyed. But alternatively, if we actually choose to engage with this type of technology, to seek out opportunities to pass this type of work over to our technology and to our devices, we have the opportunity to focus our energy on something that's far more valuable and far more rewarding. It's the human part of our jobs. And the good news is all the technology we need to do this is already here. So they said, I think the installed base of mobile devices, so tablets and smartphones, this year exceeded that of laptops and desktops. So there's more of these devices now in the world than there are traditional laptops and desktops. And within enterprise, the growth of mobile computing and tablet use is about 50% year on year. It's a huge amount of growth. And already 65% of mobile workers, so people who spend, I think it's the people who spend more than 10 hours a week away from their primary work location, already use a mobile device or a tablet. The only problem is that only 27% of them actually use it for work. The most common things that people are actually using these devices for is checking their email and surfing the web. And a lot of people are really struggling to find out what it does beyond that and to implement it beyond that. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about today. And with the work I've done with organisations in the past, there's kind of three kind of key questions that people seem to face when they're trying to understand what this technology does. The first is they're trying to understand the risks and how they manage those risks. And until people have actually understood those risks, a lot of people actually just push back on that point alone. Oh, my data's not secure. I don't think I'll go any further, thanks. The second thing is about what do they actually use it for? So what type of tasks is this actually most suitable for? And what should I be using my other devices? I seem to have a laptop and a smartphone and paper and all these things I carry with me. Which one is suitable for which task? And finally, how does it actually work? Like, how do I actually use the device and use the apps and put it together to create something that's actually really genuinely useful? I want to start talking about some of the risks. And I'm just going to go through a bit of a list. And I know that actually the list is not actually that comprehensive. I mean, when I have this session with teams, often people come up with a whole bunch of other risks that I haven't identified here. But there's issues around installing malware or viruses, their device being lost or stolen, passwords get compromised, the apps that they use lose all their important data, the server gets hacked. There's concerns about work-life balance, like how is it that I still get time out, when I have this device with me all the time? there's health and well-being concerns. And what I mean by that is, there's ergonomic risks that come with using these type of devices that we don't necessarily consider when we are used to having this amazing ergonomic setup with a special chair that goes up and down and everything's been set up, and someone came around and assessed us and we sat up straight and everything went really well. There's even issues within organisations around malicious intent. What happens if someone wants to come in and try and take all our important information and give it to our competitor? There's issues around the hacking of third-party service, and there's issues around that we're concerned about government surveillance. So with all these things, though, what I would argue is that with most of these things, there's actually things we can do to control them. There's choices that we can make about the apps that we choose, about how we use our technology, about how we set it up, that actually can minimize a lot of these risks. There are certain things that are actually very difficult to control, like the hacking of third-party servers, and as we now know, the NSA is watching us pretty much all the time. I don't know if anyone saw, there's a little meme that was going around on Facebook. It has like your privacy settings, and it says, who should be viewing this? Is it just you and your friends? Sorry, you, your friends, and the NSA, you and the NSA, the whole world. and so, without going into the detail about how we manage each of those risks individually, I would suggest that there is actually an overarching position that we can take. And it's about the idea that we can be informed and intentional in the way that we use technology. I think that one thing that's been really interesting about the use of technology at a personal level within organisations is that very few people are actually trained in it. I mean, if you think about it, like if you have a plumber goes and does like a 3-year apprenticeship before you let them loose on the pipes in your house. And now, who here has had formal training in email? How many? Anyone? No one. Who uses email every day? Right. Who gets sick of getting really badly written emails? Yeah? Okay. So this is the thing, for some reason, it's almost like we never thought this stuff would stick. When email first came in, well, that's probably just a fad. When Microsoft Office came in, I don't think I'll be using that in a few years' time. I don't think I'll do any training in that. I think at some point now, it's been 20 years since email's been around. Like, we need to stop treating it like a kid, start treating it like an adult. And I think that, mobile technology is no different. If we take a passive position on this and just let it happen to us, we will continue to face these challenges. But if we can make ourselves informed and actually think more intentionally about how we use technology, where we use it and what we use it for, suddenly that we open up a whole new possibility in terms of both being more productive and effective and actually ultimately being more human at work. Because a big issue with the lack of intentionality and we let technology just happen to us is we get bogged down in data and information-driven work, which ultimately could be quite easily passed off to our devices. So I want to talk a little bit now about what we should use our tablet for. And this is a really common suite of technology that executives seem to carry around with them these days. We all have our tablet, we have our laptop, we have our smartphone, and we have paper. And paper is a technology as well. It's a very old technology. It hasn't changed much in the last few hundred years, but it's a technology that most of us rely on every single day. And a lot of people, when they first get their tablet, their immediate reaction is to think it's like their laptop. And in some ways, you can see some similarities. It's got a screen on it. There's a keyboard for data entry. But to be honest, beyond that, actually, there's very few similarities. And when we look at it in terms of our laptop, it's only about half, I'd say 50% like our laptop. And it's not the 50% that we immediately think it is. A lot of executives, when they first get their devices, they want to know how they use Microsoft Office on it. They want to know, how do I use Word, Excel, and PowerPoint? And fundamentally, that's the half it's terrible at. That's not what it's for. The other half of what you do on your laptop or desktop is actually what this has actually becomes really good for. Whether it be about communications and using email or other forms of communication such as social networks, whether it be about kind of taking notes, annotating documents, these are the types of things that actually is really, really powerful for. Then we have our smartphones. So everyone here now, I assume, has some type of smartphone. Yeah, carries that around with them everywhere. And in some ways, I'd argue that this is more like your smartphone than it is like your laptop. And in terms of the types of data that we access and the information that we use on a daily basis, the types of information we find on our smartphone and on our tablet are very, very similar. The big difference to me, though, is around data consumption. versus information creation. So when these were first released, everyone was saying, oh, that's just an information consumption device. So reading the news and surfing the web and watching videos. But I think fundamentally that's what our phones have become. So when I need to check an email or see if I've got an email, I'll immediately look for my phone and pull it out and say, oh, who's that email from? But if I need to respond to them, I'll immediately look for my tablet because I can't really type on those tiny little keyboards. So I think that that's what, to me, is the big difference, is this is actually about information creation versus a phone, which is about information consumption. And finally, we have paper. And when you look at the two things, they're not very similar at all. You know, they don't actually have a lot in common. But I would argue that this is actually more like paper than any of those other technologies. In fact, I would argue that it's actually about 95% like paper. And if you look around and see what it is that you do on paper on a daily basis, I would suggest that about 95% of it can be done on your tablet and actually done better on your tablet. But there are some things that we still need paper for, and I'm going to give you one very important example.
Emma. Emma. Emma.
But if we think about what are the things that we do on paper, you know, here's, again, it's like an abbreviated list. But if you think about some of the things, you know, we use it to take notes. We use it to annotate and mark up documents. We use it to keep lists of things to do. We sometimes want to draw or doodle or sketch ideas out. We use it to share information with other people and transport information. I think that's a really interesting one because, you know, remember like in the early 1980s when they had this prediction about the paperless office. That's when it kind of emerged. And it was tied to the idea that everyone was going to have a PC on their desk. And so why would we use paper anymore? And do you want to know what happened? Like paper use just like skyrocketed. And it was really interesting because what actually happened was that the ability to create new information became so easy. So like you have an Excel spreadsheet, you change 2 cells and bang, I've got new information. You want to share it with somebody or transport it somewhere, take it somewhere else. The best thing to do is press print. So we're just printing out more and more information, which was marginally different than the information before. So I think sharing information, transporting information, reading, signing documents, capturing reminders. And if you look at these things, there's a couple here that I put little asterisks against. And these are the things that I think kind of represent the 5%. The 5% where technology can actually get in the way of what it is that we're trying to do. When it comes to reading, like a pleasure activity, it's actually not as enjoyable to read on your mobile device as it is to read on paper. And when it comes to kind of drawing, doodling, and some very specific creative activities, also you can often find that technology gets in the way. If you're brainstorming with people, like, you know, if I'm working in a session with a small group of people, I'd still prefer to work on a whiteboard or a flip chart than try and take the notes directly onto my device. And so I think we need to be aware of there are limitations, but for most of these tasks that we do on paper, we will be able to do them better than what we can do on than what we do on paper. So we should be able to use our tablet for 95% we do on paper, plus a bunch of other things that paper can't do. And I think this idea that it does things that we don't know it does, I think is really important. Because we have this issue where we have a limited perception. I saw this post the other day on, I think it might have been on Facebook or one of those things. And it's this picture of it says, the estimated size of the universe versus the observable universe. And I thought that's quite funny because it's almost exactly the same thing, except if you replace the word opportunity or universe with opportunity, that's what this is about. You know, the observable opportunity is actually much, much smaller than the actual opportunity. And I'll give you one example. This is an app that I use called Wunderlist. I don't know if anyone's used Wunderlist. And in a sense, it actually doesn't matter whether we're talking about Wunderlist. We're talking about the functionality of what this app does, which is more important. So here makes lists of things to do. Yeah? Okay. So when people who make lists, there's 2 very common issues that they have, which they would love to have addressed by technology. The first is, how can I keep all my lists together? Because when you start a list and then you, on one page of your notebook, and then you start another list 5 pages later, and then you're trying to flip backwards and forwards between these lists all the time, wouldn't it be great if you could have all your lists in one place? The second thing would be, is how can I take items from one list and move them onto another one? Because you have this issue, isn't it, like where you kind of knock off 80% of the tasks on your list. You're left with 3 or 4 things left, and it's like, do I keep that list? Do I start a new one? It's also hard. And so when you kind of show people Wunderlist, that is their idea of a successful app. It would go beyond anything they could possibly imagine on paper. And so to do that, you can see here we have all our lists down one side. In fact, you can get this app on your iPad. You can also get it on your phone. You can have it on your desktop, whether it's Mac or PC. You can access it in the cloud. You can really access it from anywhere. So you can actually have one set of lists available to you wherever you are working from. Second of all, as per our request, we can edit our list and we can take these 2 items and we can move them down. Okay, let's see. So we can edit the list, grab the 2 items, and we can move them to another list, and that's done. Then we actually show people what else this app can do. This is about what I'm saying is that we're limited by what we believe is possible. So in terms of this list, I can also prioritize things and move them to the top of the list. I can actually then go into this list and I can set a due date and a reminder for the task. I could also add some subtasks to it. I could attach a file or make some notes against it, which becomes synced across all my devices. I could then get this list and actually share it with other people. And so somebody else would be able to have access to exactly the same list simultaneously that I've got. And this is what I'm saying, the observable opportunity is much, much smaller than the real opportunity. So multiply, this is just one small app around taking a list of tasks to do. Multiply that by the possibility in terms of all the different apps out there or all the different use cases that you can come up with for your tablet. And suddenly you see that it's actually the most important thing we can do is actually take the first step. As we take the first step, we actually start to see something else that is possible that wasn't possible before. And we take another step and another step. And if anything that I've done over the last couple of years since I've been doing this has just been that, is just keep taking another step and find out something else that's possible that I didn't realize was possible before. I want to talk about the high value proposition of using tablets. There's a number of value propositions. I believe this is the highest value proposition. And it's about decision making. And fundamentally with all of us, and I think in this room, would probably describe themselves, at least in a large part, as knowledge workers. And as knowledge workers, basically our value is tied to the quality of the decisions and advice that we give. If we can create better decisions or make better decisions or give better advice, our value goes up. And if we make worse decisions or offer bad advice, our value goes down. And fundamentally, the quality of those decisions is based on what we know. And knowing something is quite an interesting concept in itself, because the only way that we actually really know something is by analysing a pattern of information. So we have a consistent pattern of information over time that we have recognised. We then say, I know what's going to happen next. So fundamentally, what we know is based on our information base. And our information base is not a static thing. It changes over time. And that's why you kind of sometimes have these situations where you've got this kind of rule of thumb, and then 5 years later, the rule of thumb doesn't seem to apply anymore because the information base changed. It might have been completely accurate when it was first made, but it's no longer valid knowledge anymore. And that this information base is developed from both our personal interactions with our environment and business interactions. So in a situation here, you draw every day on a massive business information base, and it's things that you have stored on your company servers. It has in-company databases, but there's also a massive amount of things that you know yourself. It's your personal information. It's the things that you've learned. You went to a conference. It's your meeting notes. It's all that type of information. Now, historically, the way that we manage our information base is our brain, and it serves 2 functions in this. The first thing is we actually use it as a place to store information. So we go, oh, that's a really important bit of information. I'll just remember that. The second thing we also use it for is the indexing system. So when we actually want to try and remember where something was put, we ask our brain to remember for us. And there's a couple of problems with using our brains in this capacity. The first problem that we have is that our brain forgets things. So we might have actually had a very valid piece of information and we no longer remember that it existed. The second challenge is that our brain makes up memories of things that never existed. So it creates false memories. And the reality of it is that we have no way of distinguishing a false memory from a real memory. The other issue with our brains is it's inherently lazy. So when we ask it to remember something for us, it kind of comes up with the first 3 or 4 bits of information and then kind of just packs it in. And it's not necessarily the best 3 or 4 bits of information, it's just like the first 3 or 4 bits. And there's a lot of this model was kind of developed. First, it was with a friend of mine who was a knowledge management consultant. But there was also an article I read in New Scientist a couple of years ago that suggested that perhaps our brains were never meant to be memory engines. Perhaps what they're actually really, really good at is scenario planning, creating potential visions of the future. And I think we can all kind of understand what I mean when we kind of play out these different scenarios in our head so vividly that we can actually feel them. So maybe what we need to do is stop using our brain for what it's actually not very good at and let it focus on what it is excellent at. So maybe instead of using our brain in this capacity as being the place of memory and the place of indexing, we can actually use technology for this. Because technology doesn't forget, and also it indexes and searches things really, really quickly. And ultimately, we need to see that by using this technology, ultimately what we're trying to do is enhance the most powerful computing devices we have, which is ourselves. Computers cannot play out those scenarios. They cannot do that type of work, not in the way that humans can. So we need to be starting to think about how do we use these type of devices to augment ourselves and augment our ability to make good decisions. So if we want to be able to index all this information that we have available, the information that we use to make these important business decisions, we need to think about where is it now? So what's the status quo? Like, what's the size of this opportunity? And if we think about the places that we currently keep this important information, it's in filing cabinets, bookshelves, on our office desk, it's in shared drives, company databases, paper notebooks, previous paper notebooks that are kept in the third drawer, somebody else's notebook, a scrap of paper somewhere, a post-it note, USB sticks, email, brain, archives. Does this sound familiar? Yeah? How much time do you think you spend looking through these locations when you're trying to make an important decision? Secondly, a number of these locations, when you look at them, things like filing cabinets, bookshelves, office desks, these are physical locations. If you are not at that physical location, you cannot draw on that information to make your decision. The other thing is here, I've highlighted a couple of things with asterisks about shared drives, company databases, archives. And we can kind of summarize these as being kind of corporate knowledge management systems. So that's what AMP has currently taken on to help provide you with. So the whole project at the moment around the hub is fundamentally about trying to take those corporate knowledge management systems and make them available on your mobile devices so you can access that information wherever you are. But there's another whole knowledge management system that AMP can't necessarily help you with or cannot provide for you, and that's about the personal knowledge management systems. So how is it that you manage your own tacit knowledge? So within knowledge management speak, there is a spectrum of knowledge from what they call explicit knowledge to tacit knowledge. So explicit knowledge is knowledge that's very easy to capture and share with other people. And a great example of that is a report that gets written. So anyone who picks up their report, it has the context of the report at the front. It was written by such and such for the purpose of this, at this time, and the outcome was this. Yeah? So anyone who picks it up without having any experience about what that project was would understand what the report is. At the other end of the spectrum, you have this this tacit knowledge. And a great example of tacit knowledge is, how do you ride a bike? So we all know how to ride a bike, yeah? Most of us do. Try and write that down for somebody. It's extraordinarily difficult to tell someone how to ride a bike. But day to day, we actually have a lot of this type of tacit knowledge. When we go into a meeting and take meeting notes, it's tacit knowledge. Because most of it doesn't actually have the context of that knowledge in the notes. If you were to put your meeting notes into a corporate knowledge management system and someone else was to find them, it would be considered junk. And that's where historically organisations have struggled. Our best personal knowledge management system in the past has been our notebook. So if we are to think about how is it that we can actually do this better, it's easier to kind of break down the steps that we might use in terms of recording and storing, searching and using information. So in this case of knowledge use, this is the process we kind of go through. We either discover or create some information. We record it somewhere. Historically, it's been our paper notebook. We then store it, and in that case, the paper notebook is the storage. We put it on our bookshelf. We then search and we index our brain and we go, where was that meeting notes? We then go and find that information and then we use it. And if we think about it, the only time that we create value is when we use it. None of this other part creates any value whatsoever. And one of the challenge with knowledge management at a personal level is that sometimes when you record information, you actually have no idea whether or not it's going to be valuable in the future. Yet somehow you've got to store every piece of information with the assumption that it could be. So the other part of this around recording, storing, searching is about how do we minimize the cost. And in each case, there's an app that does that. And what we want to understand is what are the apps that allow us to do each of these pieces of our job. Another really important thing to remember is that it's actually all about the apps. Your device is actually agnostic of purpose. So if I give this to my 3-year-old, it's basically a gateway to ABC iView. You give it to a teenager and it's a games console. And you give it to an executive and in theory it's a performance-enhancing business machine. But the only thing that makes it as such is the apps. And one of the challenges a lot of people face is how do I choose apps and what makes a good one? So here's some things to first of all remember about apps. Is that free apps are really expensive. Free apps are a false economy. The cost of the app is not what you pay for it, it's your time. If you get a free app and then you spend an hour testing it, that costs you $60. You're better off paying the $15 for a good app and spending less time testing it or being sure at the end of it that you actually have an app that you'd want to keep. The second thing is only choose one app per task. So if you have a task that you choose to do on your device, like taking notes, have one note-taking app. And it's okay to test another note-taking app, but at some point very quickly you need to make a decision and have one. Check the App Store rating, but don't put too much faith in it. A lot of the App Store ratings are manipulated, but as a general rule, if something doesn't rate kind of 4 stars on the App Store, it's probably not worth him taking too much further. But that's it. I wouldn't kind of say that the 5-star app is the best app. A lot of people who are rating apps on the App Store are rating against a very, very small criteria. And that criteria is about how effective is it the first thing I picked it up and used it for. So if I picked it up to use it for note-taking, how good was it at note-taking? Check to see when it was last updated. So if it hasn't been updated for a while, one of the things about apps is the fact that the developer base is quite big. Some apps are no longer supported. So if it hasn't been updated in the last 3 months or so, I'd be a bit dubious. If it hasn't been updated in 6 months, I would be downright ignoring it. And the third thing is, the last thing here is about using a broad assessment criteria, which I'm going to go through with you now. So in a sense, this assessment criteria is not so much a criteria as a process. So this is actually the process I go through when I test apps. So for me, I test apps in about 20 minutes to half an hour. And at the end of it, I actually have a fairly good idea whether or not it's any good or not. But the first thing is what you find in the App Store rating. How effective is it? So you just get it up and start playing. Like if you're using it to take notes, start taking some notes in it. And in that process, find out, was it easy to do that? How intuitive was it for you to be able to understand what the buttons did and what the menu system does and how to use that app? The next thing I'd be looking for is how robust it is. And robustness is about 2 things. One, did it crash when I was testing it? And if it crashed repeatedly, I'd be dubious about whether or not it's actually ready for prime time yet. The second thing is, in terms of robustness, is look in the menu system and find out how do you back up your data. If there's no way of backing up your data or exporting your data out of that app, I'd be very, very, very dubious about using it. If we go back to some of the risks, one of the risks that we face is what happens if an app loses our important data. The ability to back up to a third-party independent service is very important.
Just because you're working in done services, just that openness could also be our downfall, because from places I worked before, what I do now. If it's open, it also means it's open for other apps to steal stuff from you. So you got to be also sure that you have a good lock on it.
Okay, so with openness, there's so the point we're saying that sometimes openness can mean it's too easy for information to get out of that app and into another app. Is anyone not using an iPad? Is anyone using an Android tablet here? Okay, so that's where the risk lies. Within iOS, information within apps, you basically have to specifically allow data to be transferred from one app to another. The other thing about openness is actually not necessarily, though, it's actually about open file formats. It's about the fact that you can actually export your data in a format that other apps could potentially use. So if you've been using, for instance, a note-taking app or a task management app, can you export your task list in an open file format so that you could import it into another app if you chose to do so? I'm very much against people using proprietary file formats that nobody else can read. The other thing about openness is about cross-platform. So is this app available across other devices? Can I use it on my desktop? Can I use it on my smartphone? And with very few exceptions, the best apps are the ones that you can actually use across all types of devices. So I actually run two Android tablets as well, and I have a Windows RT tablet just for fun. I don't really use it actually, interestingly. But to me, the ideal would be is that depending on what kind of group of people I'm training, I could literally just put down one tablet, pick up another one, and have exactly the same information available to me as I had 5 minutes beforehand. Is my information searchable? Searchability is a massive, it's almost like a need. I would almost not touch an app that doesn't have good search built into it. We all deal now with situations of information overload, and effectively without some type of built-in search functionality, we will not be able to find what we're looking for fast. And the last thing is about collaboration. And although there are very few collaborative apps out there at the moment, it's something that I look for in apps because I believe it's the way that work is moving. And I have a lot of respect for people for developers who are always starting to think about how that works in their application. So here's some apps that I use, and I think with these apps, it's not so important about the apps, it's about the functionality of the apps that becomes important. There are other apps around that do similar things, but these are the ones that I kind of use on a regular basis. The first one here is one called iThoughts HD. I don't know if has anyone here used iThoughts? One person. So this is the best app in the world, okay? I use this app daily. Interestingly enough, it's a mind mapping app, but I actually use it for all my note taking. I use it for creating report outlines. I use it for creating presentations, for training plans. It's extraordinarily powerful app. I've put an alternative down there for Android called MindJet, but to be honest, there are no alternatives. Evernote. So Evernote is how I use, anyone here using Evernote? Few more people. Okay. So Evernote, in a sense, is the backbone of my personal knowledge management system. So it allows me to put information into Evernote from my device and make it available to me from all my other devices, from my laptop computer, from my desktop computer. So I use it for storing information. I clip images and articles from the web directly into Evernote. I use it to find things very, very quickly. The search functionality in Evernote is extraordinary. And I'm not sure if it's on the free version, but definitely on the paid version of it. You can take a photo of a whiteboard and it will read the text out of the whiteboard and make it searchable for you. The alternative is Microsoft OneNote, but the OneNote app on an iPad is pretty poor, to be honest. I know that the OneNote experience on a desktop can actually be quite good, but there are, again, not really a lot of alternatives to Evernote at the moment. The last, this one here is iAnnotate. So I use this for marking up all my documents, so marking up PDF documents. And there is an alternative in GoodReader. I find the usability of iAnnotate is higher. Lastly, Wunderlist, which we talked about before in terms of syncing tasks and sharing task lists across devices. The big important thing to remember about apps is about having one go-to place for each task and choosing your apps wisely. So think about your go-to places, like where would I go to for my notes? Where would I go to store information? Where would I go to search to look? By limiting the number of go-to places is actually ultimately about reducing the amount of time it takes to find the information that you're looking for. So for me, I have about 4 go-to places. So I have my email as a go-to place. I don't necessarily file my emails or anything like that. I use Gmail as my back end. The searchability is excellent. So if I'm looking for communication, I would go to email. If I was looking for notes, I would go to iThoughts. And apart from that, I have my corporate knowledge management system, which for me is Google Drive. And I have my personal knowledge management system, which for me is Evernote. So there's 4 places. So effectively, if I want to find anything that I have, I can go to those 4 places, and within about 30 seconds, I could have searched them all to find out what was available to me. Okay, I'm going to give you a bit of a demonstration because it's worth understanding how these things work together. Okay, so this here is a training plan around Evernote. One of the things about, if you think about when we take notes or we develop, write things down on paper, one of the big challenges is how linear it is, yeah? So we might have a situation where a conversation doesn't follow a linear progression. We talk about point A, point B, point C, point B, point D, point A, yet when we kind of work in a linear fashion, we can't kind of keep our information together. So first of all, the one thing about our thoughts is you can add information into it wherever you want. You don't have to follow a linear progression. Ultimately as well, you can rearrange your thoughts. So I can actually take this idea and move it down there. Actually, I'm going to make it a subpoint of that. This whole thing's going to move up there, and I can rearrange my thoughts. Ultimately, once I finish this, though, I can still export it in a format that other people will find usable. So I can just say I want to email this map and just include the outline in the body, and it comes out by standard bullet points. Alternatively, if I was actually using this as a training plan, I might want to create a PowerPoint presentation out of it. So I can export it as a PowerPoint. Sorry, this is a little bit slow. I say slow, and then I had this presentation I did about 2 weeks ago, and the opening question was, what's your earliest memory of the internet? And people were talking about dial-up modems and how, you used to kind of connect them and then go away and make a cup of tea. And then you come back a bit later on and then find that you would be connected. And, here we are now complaining with the fact that something takes 30 seconds to, is that working? Sorry, I missed something then. So we were going. That is correct, yeah. Okay, let me try this again. So you take a PowerPoint and you can open in, I use Keynote for my presentations. I find Keynote's as good as any presentation app that's available on iOS, though nothing will render a PowerPoint presentation perfectly. So we can go here, this is the Evernote training presentation that we've just created. I might just grab that and put it up the front to make it look pretty. Okay, and so now we can have Evernote training, and we can go people through, here's the uses, here's the setup, this is the basic building blocks, this is the intermediate stages, and so we can take our notes and transfer them in a format that's very easy to present and share with other people. Correct, so each first level topic becomes a title of a slide. The second level topics become bullet points, and the third level topics become subpoints. You can also add notes around slides and other type of information as well if you'd like. But from this, I could also then say, that I want to export this, share it. I'm going to open in another app as a PDF. Oh, cancel that, sorry. Share and print, open another app, and I'm going to, as a PDF document. So choose the app, and we're going to open in iAnnotate. So I find, for instance, like when we're annotating documents, a lot of people like to print out documents and then write all over them. The problem you've got as soon as you've done that is that the quality of the information that you're creating is at a really low level. And what I mean by that is your handwriting is not searchable. Your handwriting is not repurposable. It's also, so you can't, if you were to go back and find where was that document, what did I write on it? You would actually also need to have that digitized after you've printed it out and create more low-level information. Whereas with here, I could easily go through and say, well, actually, I want to delete this slide. And then I'm going to go down here, and we're going to highlight this text. Add another note, increase font size. And then I'm going to go down this next page and I'm going to sign off on it. So you can actually use this to actually sign documents and stuff as well. And after that, we're going to send this back and store it in Evernote. So we'll flatten it so all the annotations are embedded into the document, and we will send that to Evernote. So this now becomes, by going to Evernote now, all of that information that was in that original presentation, plus my annotations, are all searchable. They're all repurposable at some later point. So it's going to create a new note for me now. Evernote training, and we open up this PDF document. We'll see here is the original note. You can see up here, there's a hyperlink to the note that I made. There's a notes page appended at the back, and it says, delete this slide, or I can go this one here that says increase font, etc., etc. So I'm trying to demonstrate this very simple use case, but here's how you can imagine about the idea of creating information, storing it, searching it, repurposing it. So,
will that hyperlink work offline?
It will work on your desktop as well as here. It will work in Adobe Reader. In most PDF programs now, hyperlinked notes like that will work. Okay, so last thing I'm going to quickly leave you with is how to get started. The first thing I would say to people, take the time to learn your hardware. It's not actually a big exercise. Like when I go through it with an executive, it's like 20 minutes. But a lot of people just like struggle to kind of know what the buttons do or how to navigate or use gestures. It's worth taking that small amount of time to learn your hardware so you feel comfortable with it. The second thing is about practicing in a safe environment. One of the big challenges we have in business is that there's not naturally safe environments for us to practice in. And when we talk about, like, often people say kids are so good with this stuff, I think fundamentally the difference is they put themselves in a safe environment to practice. They get together with their friends, like a peer-to-peer learning environment. They try and break things and they try and fix things together. We struggle because we can't be seen to be infallible, and so often we try and do all this in isolation. As a result of it, we don't become as effective as we possibly could. It's really important to be able to type effectively on the screen. It's no good taking handwritten notes on your iPad. As I said, it's not searchable, it's not repurposable. Most people can only handwrite at about 35 words a minute. So if you can type at 35 words a minute on the screen, there is no penalty in using your tablet as your primary way of taking notes. And there's this little app here called Tap Typing Trainer. It's fantastic. I've had clients go from 15 words a minute typing with 2 fingers to 30 words a minute in a week. So it's a completely obtainable objective. Speech recognition doesn't work, by the way. So anyone who's thinking I can just talk into it and that will translate everything for me, it's not true. Start with setting one simple, clear objective. So if there was all the things we talked about today, there was one thing, whether it be like keeping a list of tasks or taking notes that like really resonated with you and you're like, I could do that. Start with just that. Do that one thing. Be clear about what you need to do. Like, so what skills do I need to have? What app am I going to use? How am I going to take the time to learn it? And once you've got that down pat, then start on something else. Take your tablet with you everywhere. The biggest thing for me when I first started was literally the day I got this, I threw away my notepad and pen and I took this with me everywhere. It became the only device. In fact, since that day, I've not carried a pen with me. I've got a stylus, but that's about it. And the last thing is ask your peers or children for help. I think, as I said, it's really important that we don't feel that we do this in isolation. You will learn much faster and much better by doing the learning in a group environment. So basically, the objective here is about, if you can remember, there's one thing is this, it's about recording better information, finding it faster, repurposing it easier, and making better decisions.